The pale morning light crept over the horizon as Felicity Morgan pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the early spring chill seeping through the worn fabric of her dress. Her father's homestead lay behind her, but her gaze remained fixed on the solitary hill that rose from the Wyoming plains like an island in a golden sea of grass. It was 1876, and the Morgan family had been in this territory for just 8 months, long enough to build a small cabin, plant their first crops, and bury Felicity's mother in the hard, unforgiving ground. At 22, Felicity had become the woman of the house overnight, responsible for her father and 2 younger brothers. But this daily walk to the hill was hers alone, a moment of quiet reflection before the demands of the day consumed her. The hill wasn't particularly remarkable. No higher than 60 feet and topped with a cluster of ponderosa pines, it offered a view of the vast landscape that surrounded their homestead. To the east, the plains stretched toward the sunrise. To the west, the distant mountains loomed blue and mysterious against the sky. It was the only place Felicity felt she could breathe. She made her way up the gentle slope, her boots leaving impressions in the dew-dampened grass. The morning birds had begun their chorus, their songs carrying across the open space. At the top, she settled on a large, flat rock and closed her eyes, letting the growing warmth of the sun wash over her face. "Ma," she whispered to the wind. "I'm trying my best, but Pa isn't the same without you. The boys need more than I can give them." A tear slid down her cheek, quickly brushed away. Weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. After allowing herself these precious moments of vulnerability, Felicity stood and surveyed the land around her. Their homestead looked small from this distance, a rough-hewn cabin with a thin plume of smoke rising from the chimney, a corral with their 2 workhorses and milk cow, and the beginnings of what would be their first wheat crop. Movement caught her eye. Her father had emerged from the cabin and was heading toward the barn. She sighed, knowing her moment of peace was over. With one last look at the horizon, she made her way back down the hill to face the day's work. This was her ritual each morning for months. Wake before dawn, climb the hill as the first light touched the sky, and return as the farm stirred to life. No one questioned her need for this solitude. They all had their ways of coping with the harsh realities of frontier life. Miles away, in the small but growing town of Rivercross, Samuel Granger stared at the ceiling of his rented room above the livery stable. The first light of day filtered through the threadbare curtains, casting long shadows across the sparse furnishings. He'd been in town for nearly 2 weeks now, longer than he'd stayed anywhere since leaving Texas. At 28, Samuel had spent the last 5 years drifting from ranch to ranch, town to town, taking work where he could find it. He wasn't running from the law, not exactly, but from memories that haunted him like persistent ghosts. The war between the states had ended 11 years ago, yet Samuel still carried pieces of it within him. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and reached for his boots. The livery owner had offered him steady work breaking horses, and Samuel had a way with even the wildest mustangs. It wasn't the life he'd envisioned for himself, but it was honest work that kept him fed and housed. After splashing water on his face from the basin, he dressed quickly and made his way downstairs to the stables. The familiar sense of hay, leather, and horses greeted him, bringing a small measure of comfort. This, at least, was consistent wherever he went. "Mornin', Mr. Granger," called Jasper, the stable boy. "Mr. Finch says there's a new batch coming in today. Wild ones from up north." Samuel nodded, pulling his hat lower over his eyes. "Better get the corral ready then." The morning passed in a blur of activity. By midday, 6 new Mustangs had been delivered, spirited creatures with fire in their eyes and resistance in every muscle. Samuel spent hours working with them, his movements calm and deliberate, his voice a steady stream of quiet reassurance. "You're good with them," observed Mr. Finch as they watched the horses begin to settle in the corral. Never seen anything like it. Samuel shrugged. They just want to know they can trust you. Well, I'm glad you decided to stay on. Town could use more men with your skills. Stay on. The words stirred something uncomfortable in Samuel's chest. He hadn't planned to stay, not really. Rivercross was just another stop on a journey with no destination. Yet something about this place felt different. Perhaps it was the way the mountains stood sentinel in the distance, or how the people nodded to him on the street without asking questions about his past. Thought I might ride out this evening, Samuel said, changing the subject. Get a feel for the land around here. Finch nodded. Good idea. Take Dusty there, he could use the exercise, and he's got a smooth gait. As the day began to wane, Samuel saddled the dun gelding and headed out of town. He rode with no particular direction in mind, simply following where the horse seemed inclined to go. The setting sun cast long shadows across the plains, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. The gelding carried him eastward, away from the mountains and toward the scattered homesteads that dotted the territory. Samuel hadn't ventured this way before, preferring the solitude of the wilderness to the reminder of settled life. But today he let the horse choose their path. After riding for nearly an hour, he spotted a solitary hill rising from the plains. Something about it drew his attention, perhaps the way the last light of day kissed its summit, or the small figure he could just make out ascending its slope. Curious, Samuel guided Dusty closer, keeping a respectful distance but watching as the figure, clearly a woman, made her way to the top of the hill. There was purpose in her stride, as if this journey was one she had made many times before. As the sun dipped lower, casting its dying rays across the land, Samuel found himself transfixed by the silhouette of the woman against the darkening sky. She stood tall, her skirts moving gently in the evening breeze, her face turned toward the setting sun. Something about her solitude resonated with him, touching a loneliness he rarely acknowledged. Without conscious thought, he urged Dusty forward, drawn to the hill and the mysterious woman who claimed it in the fading light. Felicity heard the approach of hooves before she saw the rider. Her daily morning visits to the hill had become so routine that she had grown complacent about her safety. Now, as dusk gathered around her and a stranger approached, she felt a flicker of unease. She had come later than usual, the day's work having consumed more time than expected. Her father had gone into town for supplies, leaving her to finish the evening chores. Only after her brothers were fed and settled had she been able to steal away, drawn to the hill by some inexplicable need. Instinctively, Felicity reached for the small knife she kept in her pocket, a gift from her father who had insisted she never go anywhere unarmed. The approaching rider slowed as he neared the base of the hill, as if sensing her wariness. "Evening, madam," called a deep voice, respectfully keeping his distance. "Didn't mean to startle you." Felicity didn't respond immediately, assessing the man from her vantage point. He sat easily in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the darkening sky. His horse, a sturdy dun gelding, stood patiently beneath him. "You're on Morgan land," she finally called back, her voice steadier than she felt. The rider touched the brim of his hat. "My apologies. Didn't realize I'd crossed onto private property. Name's Samuel Granger. I'm working over at Finch's livery in Rivercross." "Rivercross is a fair distance to be riding this time of evening, Mr. Granger." "Just getting to know the territory," he replied. "I can leave if I'm intruding." Something in his tone, a hint of loneliness that matched her own, made Felicity hesitate. He didn't seem threatening, and there was something oddly comforting about the presence of another person on this hill that had witnessed so many of her private tears. "You can stay," she found herself saying. "But I should warn you, there's not much to see except grass and sky." Samuel dismounted, looping Dusty's reins around a scrubby bush at the base of the hill. He removed his hat as he climbed the gentle slope, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Sometimes grass and sky are enough," he said as he approached, still keeping a respectful distance. "I'm sorry if I interrupted your solitude, Mississippi." "Morgan. Felicity Morgan. Miss Morgan." He nodded, his eyes a startling blue in his sun-browned face meeting hers briefly before looking out over the landscape. "It's a fine view from up here." "It is," she agreed, surprised by how natural it felt to share her sanctuary with this stranger. "I come here every morning. It helps me think." Samuel nodded, understanding in his expression. Everyone needs a place like that. They stood in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. Felicity knew she should return home. Her father would be worried if he returned to find her gone, but something kept her rooted to the spot. "Do you have far to go?" Samuel asked, gesturing toward the plains. "Our homestead is just beyond those cottonwoods," she replied, pointing to a small grove visible in the fading light. "My father and brothers are probably wondering where I've gone." "I'd be happy to escort you back," he offered, "if you'd allow it." Felicity hesitated only briefly. "Thank you. That would be kind." They descended the hill together, Samuel retrieving Dusty before falling into step beside her. The horse followed obediently, occasionally nudging Samuel's shoulder as if to remind him of its presence. "How long have you been in these parts?" Felicity asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "About 2 weeks," Samuel replied. "Before that, I was working cattle in Colorado. And before that, well, I've been moving around a lot since the war." The mention of the war hung between them, heavy with unspoken experiences. Felicity had been just a child when it ended, but she remembered the changed men who had returned to her hometown in Missouri, her own uncle among them, forever altered by what he had seen and done. "And your family?" Samuel asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. "Have you been here long?" 8 months, Felicity replied, grateful for the shift. "We came from Missouri after my mother passed. My father thought a fresh start would help us all heal." She swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in her throat. "It hasn't been easy." "It never is," Samuel said softly, and Felicity sensed he understood more than she had revealed. As they approached the Morgan homestead, lights glowed warmly in the cabin windows. The sound of their approach brought Felicity's father to the door, rifle in hand, until he recognized his daughter's silhouette. "Felicity." He stepped into the yard, concern etched on his weathered face. "Where have you been, girl? I was about to come looking for you." "I'm sorry, Pa. I went up to the hill and lost track of time." She gestured to Samuel. "This is Mr. Granger. He works at the livery in Rivercross and was kind enough to see me home safely." James Morgan's suspicious gaze softened slightly as he assessed the stranger. "Appreciate you looking after my daughter, Mr. Granger." Samuel touched the brim of his hat. "It was no trouble, sir. You have a fine piece of land here." A hint of pride crossed James's face. "Working on making it finer. Would you care to step inside? Least we can do is offer you some coffee before you head back to town." Samuel glanced at the darkening sky, clearly weighing the offer against the long ride ahead. "That's very kind, but I should probably get back before it's fully dark." "Nonsense," James insisted. "Roads around here aren't safe to travel at night, not for a stranger to these parts. We've got a spare pallet in the barn if you'd like to rest here and head back at first light." Felicity watched as Samuel considered the offer, a mixture of hope and uncertainty fluttering in her chest. Part of her wanted him to accept, to extend this unexpected connection that had formed between them on the hill. Another part recognized the danger in such feelings. Attachment had only brought her pain since coming to this harsh land. "If you're certain it's no imposition," Samuel finally said. I would be grateful for the hospitality. James nodded, seemingly satisfied. Felicity, show Mr. Granger where he can tend to his horse while I warm up some stew. As her father disappeared into the cabin, Felicity led Samuel toward the small barn, conscious of his presence behind her in a way that made her skin tingle with awareness. Your father seems like a good man, Samuel observed as they entered the barn, the familiar sense of hay and animals enveloping them. He is, Felicity agreed, lighting a lantern that hung near the door. He's had a hard time since my mother died, but he's done his best for us. She indicated an empty stall. You can put your horse in there. There's fresh hay in the loft. Samuel nodded, leading Dusty into the stall and beginning to remove his tack. Felicity watched his capable hands work, struck by the gentle way he handled the animal despite his obvious strength. Thank you, she said suddenly, for walking with me. It's been lonely here sometimes. Samuel paused, his eyes finding hers in the lantern light. I understand lonely, he said quietly. More than most, perhaps. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of kindred spirits that transcended their brief acquaintance. Felicity felt her cheeks warm under his gaze and quickly looked away. I should go help with supper, she murmured. Make yourself comfortable. We'll call you when the food is ready. She hurried from the barn, her heart beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. It was foolish to feel this way about a stranger, a drifter who would likely be gone tomorrow, continuing his aimless journey. Felicity had responsibilities here, ties that bound her to this land and to her family. There was no room in her life for romantic notions. Yet as she entered the cabin and moved to help her father with the evening meal, she couldn't help but glance toward the barn, wondering what it would be like to have someone like Samuel Granger stay. Supper was a simple affair: beef stew, cornbread, and strong coffee, but Samuel ate with appreciation, complimenting Felicity's cooking with genuine warmth. Her younger brothers, Thomas and Daniel, peppered him with questions about his travels and his work with horses, their youthful enthusiasm drawing reluctant smiles from their normally reserved father. The boys tell me you're breaking Mustangs for Finch, James commented as they finished their meal. Good stock, Samuel nodded. Some of the finest I've seen. Wild, but with good bone and spirit. We could use another horse, James mused. These two we've got are solid for plowing, but not much good for riding any distance. He glanced at his daughter. Felicity here used to be quite the horsewoman back in Missouri. Haven't had the means to get her a proper mount since we arrived. Felicity felt her cheeks warm at being the subject of conversation. Pa, Mr. Granger doesn't need to hear about that. Actually, Samuel interjected, there's a mare in the new batch that might suit you, Miss Morgan. Spirited but not mean. She's got the look of a good cow horse, quick and smart. We couldn't afford anything like that, James said, his pride evident in his stiffening posture. Samuel set down his coffee cup. I wasn't suggesting charity, Mr. Morgan, but I could use some help with the breaking, and if you've got time to spare, we might work something out. Trade labor for the mare. James considered this, stroking his graying beard. Been a while since I worked with green horses. Not sure how much help I'd be. I could do it, Felicity said, surprising herself with her boldness. I've gentled horses before. Her father frowned. That's men's work, Felicity. With all due respect, sir, Samuel said carefully. Some of the best horse handlers I've known have been women. They've got a patience most men lack. A tense silence fell over the table as James Morgan clearly wrestled with the idea. Finally, he sighed. We'll discuss it further in the morning. For now, it's getting late, and we all have an early start tomorrow. He turned to his sons. Boys, time for bed. As the family prepared for the night, Samuel returned to the barn, Settling on the pallet Felicity had prepared for him with fresh straw and a worn but clean blanket. He lay awake for some time, listening to the night sounds and thinking about the Morgan family, especially Felicity, with her quiet strength and the sadness that seemed to hover just behind her eyes. Morning came early on the homestead. Samuel woke to the sounds of activity in the yard, James Morgan's deep voice giving instructions to his sons, the clatter of buckets, the lowing of the milk cow. He rose quickly, splashing water from a bucket onto his face before stepping out into the crisp dawn air. Felicity was already at work, collecting eggs from the small chicken coop near the garden. She looked up as Samuel emerged from the barn, a faint smile touching her lips. "Good morning, Mr. Granger. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in some time," he replied honestly. "Can I help with anything before I head back to town?" She hesitated, then nodded toward a water pump. "If you wouldn't mind filling those buckets, I'd be grateful. The boys have other chores, and the garden needs watering before the day gets too hot." Samuel moved to the task without hesitation, pumping water into the wooden buckets and carrying them to where Felicity indicated. They worked in companionable silence, the early sun warming their shoulders. "Do you really think I could help with the horses?" Felicity asked suddenly, her voice low as if afraid her father might overhear. Samuel straightened, studying her face. "I wouldn't have offered if I didn't. You have a calm way about you. Horses respond to that." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face and caught at something in Samuel's chest. "I've missed working with horses. Back home I had a mare named Penny. She was nothing special to look at, but she had heart." "The best ones usually do," Samuel agreed. "If you're serious about the mare I mentioned, I could bring her out for you to meet. See if you two suit each other." Before Felicity could respond, James Morgan approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning, Granger. Coffee's hot inside if you're interested." "Thank you, sir. I should be heading back to town soon, though." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Been thinking about your offer. I can't spare much time away from the farm, not with planting season upon us. But if you're serious about Felicity helping with those horses." He hesitated, clearly conflicted. "Well, she's always had a way with animals." Felicity looked up in surprise, hope brightening her features. "Really, Pa? Don't get ahead of yourself, girl," James cautioned. "I'd need to see this operation first. Make sure it's proper." He turned to Samuel. "Perhaps you could ride out again when you have time. Bring this mare you mentioned. We can talk more then." Samuel nodded, understanding the protective father's hesitation. "I'd be happy to, Mr. Morgan. Perhaps in a few days, once she's had some basic handling." As Samuel prepared to depart, saddling Dusty and securing his few belongings, Felicity approached with a small bundle wrapped in a clean cloth. "Some cornbread for your journey," she explained, handing it to him. "It's not much, but it's very thoughtful," Samuel interrupted, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Miss Morgan." "Felicity," she corrected softly. "If we're to be working together, you should call me Felicity." "Felicity," he repeated, the name feeling right on his tongue. "Then you must call me Samuel." She nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Will you really come back with the mare?" "I give you my word," Samuel said, suddenly certain that he would return to this homestead regardless of horses or business arrangements. There was something in Felicity's quiet strength and gentle eyes that called to him in a way nothing had for years. With a final tip of his hat to James Morgan and a smile for Felicity, Samuel mounted Dusty and rode away from the homestead, already calculating how soon he could reasonably return. 5 days passed before Samuel was able to make good on his promise. The mare he'd spoken of, a sleek bay with a white blaze down her face, had proved intelligent and quick to learn, taking to the saddle with minimal resistance. By the 5th day, Samuel felt confident enough in her training to lead her the distance to the Morgan homestead. He set out in the early afternoon, riding Dusty and leading the bay mare on a long rope. The journey gave him time to think, to consider why he felt so drawn to return to the Morgan farm to Felicity. In his years of drifting, Samuel had made it a point not to form attachments. Attachments meant pain when it was time to move on, as it inevitably was. Yet here he was, riding toward a family he barely knew, his thoughts filled with a woman whose quiet dignity and hidden sorrow had somehow touched something long dormant within him. The hill where he had first encountered Felicity came into view, and Samuel found himself automatically scanning its summit, half expecting to see her silhouette against the sky. The hill was empty, but as he approached the Morgan homestead, he spotted Felicity in the garden, bent over rows of young plants. She straightened as she heard the horses approach, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Recognition dawned on her face, followed by a smile that Samuel could see even at a distance. She set down her tools and moved to meet him, wiping her hands on her apron as she walked. "You came back," she said as he dismounted, her voice carrying a note of pleased surprise. "I said I would," Samuel replied simply, indicating the bay mare with a gesture. "And I brought someone for you to meet." Felicity's attention shifted to the mare, her expression softening with instant appreciation. "Oh, she's lovely." She approached slowly, hand outstretched, letting the horse catch her scent. The mare snuffled curiously at Felicity's palm, then nudged against it, seeking attention. Felicity laughed, a sound so bright and unexpected that it caught Samuel by surprise. "She likes you," he observed, watching as Felicity stroked the mare's neck. "And I like her," Felicity replied, her eyes alight with a joy Samuel hadn't seen before. "Does she have a name?" Samuel shook his head. "Not yet. Thought that should be your privilege if you decide to take her." Felicity continued to stroke the mare, considering this. "Dawn," she said finally. "I think I'll call her Dawn." "A fine name," Samuel agreed, watching the way Felicity's hands moved confidently over the horse, checking legs and hooves with practiced ease. James Morgan emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He nodded to Samuel, his expression guarded but not unfriendly. "Granger, I see you brought the horse." "Yes, sir. Thought Miss Morgan might like to try her out, see if they suit each other." James approached, casting an experienced eye over the mare. "Good lines. Seems gentle enough. What's her history?" "Wild caught about 3 months ago, according to Finch. Been working with her for nearly a week now. She's green but willing." James nodded, seemingly satisfied with this assessment. "And what exactly would this arrangement entail?" "My daughter helping at the livery?" Samuel had given this considerable thought during his absence. 3 days a week, if you can spare her. She'd help with the gentling, mostly the mares, which often respond better to a woman's touch. In exchange, the mare would be hers once she's fully trained. James frowned slightly. 3 days is a lot with all the work here. 2, then, Samuel countered. "And I'd be willing to lend a hand around your place when I can. I'm handy with repairs, and I notice your corral could use some strengthening before winter." Felicity looked between the two men, her expression a mixture of hope and resignation, clearly expecting her father to refuse. James stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Felicity, take that mare for a short ride. Let's see how you handle each other." Surprise flickered across her face, quickly replaced by determination. Without waiting for further permission, she led the mare to the corral fence, using it as a mounting block to swing gracefully onto the horse's bare back. Samuel watched with admiration as Felicity settled herself, speaking softly to the mare before guiding her around the yard with subtle shifts of weight and gentle pressure from her legs. The mare responded beautifully, clearly at ease with her new rider. "She's a natural," Samuel said quietly to James. "Always been that way with horses?" James nodded, pride evident despite his attempt to remain stern. "Since she was a girl. Her mother worried she'd break her neck. The way she'd ride anything she could climb onto." His expression softened with memory. "Eleanor, my wife, she'd have liked seeing Felicity on horseback again. Been too long since I've seen her smile like that." Samuel understood then that James's hesitation wasn't just about the work Felicity would miss at the homestead, but about his daughter finding joy in something that might eventually lead her away from them. The realization made Samuel all the more determined to make the arrangement work for all involved. "2 days a week," he reiterated. "And I give you my word she'll be treated with nothing but respect at the livery. Finch is a decent man, and his wife is often there as well." James watched his daughter for another moment, then nodded. 2 days. And she's home before dark, no exceptions. "Agreed," Samuel said, extending his hand. James shook it firmly, the deal sealed. When Felicity returned, her cheeks flushed with pleasure and her eyes bright, her father gave a gruff nod. "Seems you and that mare understand each other. 2 days a week, Felicity. That's all I can spare you. And you'll still need to complete your chores here before leaving and after returning." The joy that bloomed across Felicity's face was worth any sacrifice, Samuel thought. She slid from the mare's back and impulsively hugged her father, an action that clearly surprised the older man, though his arms came around her automatically. "Thank you, Pa," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." "See that you don't," James replied gruffly, but his expression had softened. "Now, I expect Mr. Granger is hungry after his ride. Let's see about some food before he heads back to town." Samuel cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Morgan, if the offer still stands, I thought I might help with those corral repairs this afternoon. The mare should rest before the journey back anyway." James raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Could use the help if you're offering. We can get started after we eat." As they walked toward the cabin, Felicity fell into step beside Samuel, her voice low. "You don't have to do this, you know. Help with the repairs." Samuel glanced at her, struck again by the quiet strength in her features. "I know, but I want to." The smile she gave him in return settled something in Samuel's chest, a feeling of rightness he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since leaving Texas, he found himself thinking not about moving on, but about staying. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Twice a week, Samuel would ride out to the Morgan homestead at dawn, and Felicity would return with him to Rivercross to work with the horses. Their journeys back and forth became a treasured time for both opportunities to talk freely away from the watchful eyes of her family or the busy environment of the livery. Samuel shared stories of his travels, of the places he'd seen and the people he'd met. Felicity spoke of her life in Missouri, of her mother's illness, of her dreams for the future, simple dreams of prosperity for her family and perhaps, someday, a home of her own. What began as a business arrangement gradually deepened into friendship, and from friendship blossomed something more tender, something neither of them named but both increasingly relied upon. Samuel found himself looking forward to the days Felicity would work at the livery, found himself volunteering for additional projects at the Morgan homestead just to be near her. Felicity, for her part, began making her daily pilgrimage to the hill in the evenings rather than the mornings, knowing that Samuel would often meet her there at dusk, their conversations continuing as the sun painted the sky in brilliant hues before sinking below the horizon. It was on one such evening in late spring, nearly 2 months after their first meeting, that Samuel finally found the courage to speak what had been growing in his heart. They sat side by side on the flat rock at the hill's summit, watching as the last light faded from the sky. The air was warm, fragrant with wildflowers that had bloomed across the plains. In the distance, The lights of the Morgan homestead glowed like earthbound stars. "Felicity," Samuel began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you." She turned to him, her expression open and trusting. "What is it?" Samuel drew a deep breath. "I came to Rivercross with no intention of staying. I've been drifting for years, never settling anywhere for long." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I find myself not wanting to leave." Felicity's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I've been offered a partnership in the livery. Finch is getting older, and his sons have no interest in the business. He thinks I have a gift with horses, and he's willing to sell me a share." Samuel's hands twisted in his lap. "It would mean putting down roots here, making a life." "That's wonderful news," Felicity said softly. "Rivercross would be lucky to have you stay." "The thing is," Samuel continued, his heart hammering against his ribs, "I wouldn't be considering it if not for you." He met her gaze directly. "I've grown to care for you, Felicity, more than I thought possible. More than I've allowed myself to care for anyone in a very long time." A soft gasp escaped her, and in the fading light, Samuel could see the shimmer of tears in her eyes. For a terrible moment, he feared he had misjudged, that his feelings were not reciprocated. But then Felicity's hand found his, her fingers twining with his own. "I've come to care for you too," she whispered. "I look forward to our days together more than I should admit. When you're not here, I find myself watching the horizon, hoping to see you riding toward us." Relief flooded through Samuel, followed by a joy so intense it nearly took his breath away. "I don't have much to offer," he said. "Just myself and whatever future I can build at the livery. But if you'll have me, Felicity Morgan, I'd like to court you properly." A tear slipped down Felicity's cheek, quickly followed by another. "I'd like that very much," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Samuel leaned forward. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, sweet and full of promise. When they parted, Samuel rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed by the feeling of coming home after a lifetime of wandering. "I should speak to your father," he murmured. Felicity nodded, her hand still clasped in his. "He likes you more than he lets on. I've seen how he watches you with the horses, with my brothers. He respects a man who works hard and keeps his word." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they made their way down the hill hand in hand, toward the warmth and light of the Morgan homestead. For the first time in years, Samuel's path was clear before him, not an endless road leading nowhere, but a journey toward a future with the woman beside him. The following morning, Samuel rose before dawn and made his way to the kitchen, where he found James Morgan already at the table, nursing a cup of coffee. The older man looked up as Samuel entered, his expression knowing. "I expected you'd be wanting to talk to me," James said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Granger." Samuel took the offered seat, gathering his thoughts. "Mr. Morgan, I've come to care deeply for your daughter. I would like your permission to court her properly, with the intention of making her my wife if she'll have me." James studied him for a long moment. "You're planning to stay in Rivercross then? No more drifting?" "Yes, sir. Mr. Finch has offered me a partnership in the livery. It's a good opportunity, one I intend to accept." "And if Felicity weren't in the picture, would you still be staying?" The question was direct, and Samuel appreciated the older man's frankness. "Honestly, sir, probably not. But she is in the picture, and that changes everything for me. I want to build something here, something lasting." James nodded slowly. "I've watched you these past weeks, Granger. You're a hard worker. You treat my daughter with respect. And more importantly, she smiles when you're around." He set down his cup, Eleanor and I had a good marriage. Not always easy, but good. I want that for my children. I would do everything in my power to make Felicity happy, Samuel promised, meaning every word. I believe you would, James agreed. You have my permission to court her. But understand this, she's precious to me. To all of us. Don't make promises you can't keep. I understand, sir. Thank you. James stood, extending his hand. You're a good man, Samuel Granger. I think Eleanor would have approved. As they shook hands, Felicity appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of hope and nervousness. James turned to his daughter, his face softening with affection. Your young man here has my blessing, he said gruffly. Just don't expect me to be happy about losing my best farmhand. Felicity's face lit up with joy, and she rushed forward to embrace her father. Thank you, Pa. I'm not going anywhere just yet. James hugged her briefly, then stepped back, clearly uncomfortable with the display of emotion. Well, there's work to be done. Don't let me keep you too. As he left the kitchen, Felicity turned to Samuel, her eyes shining. He said yes, she whispered, as if hardly daring to believe it. Samuel crossed to her, taking her hands in his. He did. And now I'm asking you, Felicity Morgan. Will you allow me to court you? To build a life with you here in this place that's become home to us both? Yes, she replied without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon, bathing the land in golden warmth. As Samuel gazed into Felicity's radiant face, he knew that his long journey had finally led him exactly where he was meant to be. Through the spring and into summer, Samuel courted Felicity with a devotion that became the talk of Rivercross and the surrounding homesteads. He proved himself a man of his word, establishing his partnership at the livery while also helping James Morgan improve the homestead whenever time allowed. Felicity continued her work with the horses, her skill and intuition earning her respect even from those initially skeptical of a woman in such a role. Dawn, the bay mare, became truly hers, responding to Felicity's lightest touch as if they shared a single mind. Their evening meetings on the hill continued, a tradition neither wanted to abandon. It was there, as summer gave way to the first hints of autumn, that Samuel asked Felicity to be his wife. I know we haven't known each other long, he said, taking her hands in his as they sat on their familiar rock at the hill's summit. But I feel as though I've been traveling toward you my whole life. Tears of joy filled Felicity's eyes as she accepted his proposal, and when they descended the hill that evening, it was as an engaged couple, their future stretching before them like the vast Wyoming sky. They were married in October, a simple ceremony in the small church in Rivercross, with Felicity's family and the friends they'd both made in town in attendance. Samuel had used his savings to purchase a modest house on the edge of town, close enough to the livery for convenience but with enough land for Felicity to keep a garden and for Dawn to graze contentedly. As winter settled over the land, bringing with it snow and bitter cold, Samuel and Felicity found warmth in their new home and in each other. On clear days, they would still ride to the hill together, marveling at the way the snow transformed the landscape into a glittering wonderland. It's strange, Felicity said one such afternoon as they stood on their hill, bundled against the cold. I used to come here to be alone with my grief. Now it's a place of joy. Samuel slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. Places are what we make of them, I suppose. Like people. Like life. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. I never thought I could be this happy again after my mother died. I felt so lost. I know, Samuel said softly. I felt the same after the war. Like I'd never find peace again. Felicity turned in his embrace to face him, her gloved hands coming up to frame his face. But we found each other instead. "We did," he agreed, bending to kiss her, his heart full to bursting with gratitude for this woman and the life they were building together. As they made their way down the hill, hand in hand through the snow, Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought him here, the long years of drifting, the chance encounter on a Wyoming hillside, the love that had grown between them like a precious, unexpected gift. The hill stood behind them, silhouetted against the setting sun, a silent witness to their beginning and to the promise of all the days to come. Days that would bring challenges and joys, perhaps children, certainly change, but always, always the certainty of facing it together. For a man who had spent years avoiding attachments, avoiding home, Samuel Granger had found both in the most unexpected place. With a woman who walked to a hill every morning, until a cowboy met her there at dusk, and they discovered that what they each sought was not solitude after all, but the profound companionship of a kindred spirit.